Hello, my name is Andres Monge, and my global issue that I will talk about is discrimination. The two literary works that I used are Much Ado About Nothing and The Blacker the Berry by Kendrick Lamar. So the global issue is discrimination, and I have broken this down from the attitude and observation of the characters I watched in Much Ado About Nothing, and the principles they applied to the female figures, and the limitations they set, yet being indifferent when a male character does the same. The same pattern resembles the one that is referenced in the song by Kendrick Lamar, The Blacker the Berry, but instead of gender roles, it's race. So, Much Ado About Nothing is a love story between two young individuals who get engaged early on in the story. The story is told through traditions that come with having a wedding, such as bachelor parties, bachelorette parties, and other things such as that. The bride of the story, Hero, is innocently chosen to be the victim of a cruel false rumor made of her, which claims she had premarital sex, and she's shamed for this in public later in the story. In the extract I chose for Much Ado About Nothing, Hero's father expresses his disappointment for his daughter being more ashamed of her actions than sad about what was thought was her death. Don Pedro goes on a rant questioning her identity and implying her death was well deserved. In The Blacker the Berry, the song by Kendrick Lamar, Kendrick expresses his feelings for discrimination and takes an unbiased yet angry tone to attack the problems behind racism. Kendrick Lamar acknowledges both sides of the spectrum and criticizing both the white and the black communities for their wrongs. What is in the extract I chose for The Blacker the Berry, Kendrick Lamar goes through a range of emotions by using an angry tone, but being empowered and proud within the language used in his sentences. Shortly later, also using a shameful language within the sentences. So, what is the connection between these two works? The most pertinent connection, besides simply discrimination, is the way they've been discriminated against. Both of these characters that suffer from discrimination are being taken advantage of by powerful figures whom silence their words of objection. So, today we'll talk about the following. Is discrimination really an important theme in both The Blacker the Berry by Kendrick Lamar and Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare? So, continuing with the extracts I chose for Much Ado About Nothing. O fate, take not away thy heavy hand. Death is the fairest cover for her shame. Don Pedro here is so ashamed of his daughter's actions that he asks a higher power, the use of fate, claiming to a higher power to let her die as if to say she deserved it. The other line, why ever wast thou lovely in my eyes? Don Pedro completely disregards all the years his daughter shown to be the ideal woman, but the sexist subconscious takes over him when he easily believes the rumors made of his daughter without considering the possibility of it being a lie. And finally, the final line, no part of it is mine. This shame derives itself from unknown loins. Hero's father goes on to objectify his own daughter, using it as her pronoun, indicating he believes her actions are so incorrect to the point of her being a lifeless object or an animalistic creature in his eyes. You see, in the plot of Much Ado About Nothing, the principles set for the women are avoiding promiscuity and guarding sexual purity. The double standards come in when these principles only apply to the women, to Hero in this case, and everyone is devastated by the possibility of her being deflowered before marriage, whereas Benedict is a well-known ladies' man, and everyone makes light of that fact. In fact, he's being praised in the story. As to going on to the Blacker the Berry, the first line is, "I want you to recognize that I'm a proud monkey. You vandalized my perception." Monkey is a racist slur directed towards black people who are perceived by racists to be primitive and ape-like in their behavior. Kendrick takes the word and turns it into a symbol of empowerment. In regard to the vandalization of Kendrick's perception, here he addresses the stereotypes that have been applied to the black culture by people outside of black communities. They portray the black community as violent, uneducated, and threatening. The phrasing used in this line is made to mean two different things: that the public is creating a wrong image of black culture to people outside of it, but also meaning that it's hurting the image of black culture in the eyes of Kendrick Lamar himself, starting to be brainwashed, and he's starting to think and starting to think that he is that the black community is really that violent. The next line is, "I mean, it's evident that I'm irrelevant to society." Kendrick Lamar explains how his opinions are unheard. Despite the black community striving to demonstrate that they can be mature and peaceful and they're not violent, the stereotype hasn't disappeared. A clear example of this is the black community being blamed for the violence that occurs in the recent Black Lives Matter movement, when in reality, most of the time the looting and burning hasn't been caused by black members of BLM. Actually, it's mostly been outsiders, whether black or white. They're looting because they're taking advantage of the police attending to the protests and not being aware of the actions of crime happening outside of the protests. And the next line, the final line, is, "You sabotage my community, making a killing. You made me a killer. Emancipation of a real N-word." Kendrick Lamar says, "You made me a killer," in a resentful and angry voice. The purpose of this line is the resentful tone meant to acknowledge that being a killer isn't right, and it's meant to criticize black criminals and his younger self that was a black criminal, saying they're following the stereotype and they're not helping. And the shifting on the blame, saying "you made me a killer," is directed toward the government's officials that have hurt the community. You see, in The Blacker the Berry, Kendrick speaks of racism and the African American community being portrayed as violent, when the biggest increase in violence within the African Americans was after the influx of crack cocaine into predominantly African American communities, facilitated in part by the white-run CIA, while the country was under the Reagan administration. The discrimination is clear here because of the hypocrisy of society by pushing anti-bullying movement, for example, after events like the Columbine shooting and other school shootings, and taking an empathetic stance, victimizing the ones hurting here, the ones who are causing the damage here, while simultaneously looking down on black communities for the damage they've caused, even though both sides are doing it because they have been pushed to the brink, whether it's right or not. So, the relationship. But it's still important to clarify that Kendrick Lamar is acknowledging that the black community is statistically responsible for to commit more crimes. But he points fingers to the origins of this behavior due to the community being 400 years behind on proper civilization as well as other factors. So, the relationship, how do these two combine? Well, first of all, the same way that they say that Kendrick says, it's clear that I am irrelevant to society. This is a phrase that can relate to both. Regardless of the words that Hero spoke, saying he had not acted upon those promiscuous acts, no one believed her, even though it was word of mouth, and there was no true evidence, at least not in the eyes of the characters, other than the husband and Don John. So the relationship between both these literatures is the attack and the discrimination against the defenseless, while the powerful get off scot-free. The powerful in this situation is Don John takes advantage of his power by that he is Don Pedro's brother, and he uses his power to make this false rumor of Hero. The same way that Ronald Reagan used the black community, hurt them, turned them into more violent people, and then got off scot-free. The same way that Hero hasn't taken part in premarital sex of any kind, yet her words are silenced and she's forced to accept the identity she's been given of a promiscuous woman, black people are forced to take the shaming because of the criminal tendencies within their communities. But a person who is brought up in a violent environment is not the one most responsible for his criminal tendencies. They have been brought up in an uneducated environment. The ones more responsible are the CIA and the very educated president who went to a private college yet couldn't anticipate how his actions would affect the country for many years to come. Going on to the teacher questions. Do I find either text challenging or confronting in the way it presents the global issue? Why or why not? The Blacker the Berry has the theme of racism and discrimination very clear. It was not challenging to deduce that from its lyrics. The Much Ado About Nothing is a much more subliminal message here. It was part of the story was nearing the end of the play. And it wasn't that common throughout the whole story, but common enough to the point where where the play would be irrelevant without it. What are the most significant differences between the two texts and how they present the global issue? Well, the most significant part are the victims of the discrimination in this situation. The discriminated part in Much Ado About Nothing is women, specifically Hero, whereas The Blacker the Berry demonstrates the victim being Kendrick Lamar or the black community. Thank you.